Titus 2 Women's Bible Study is a Bible study about the home and relationships. We are so delighted that you have joined us, and we are going to be especially treated to a very special lady today doing our lesson. She comes to us by way of England and Scotland. So you're going to hear a delightful lilt in her voice, but she is a wonderful lady, and I am so privileged that she is going to share with you. I had the honor of being at her wedding about 4 years ago, I believe. And I have watched her grow in the Lord and grow in her marriage and her love towards her husband. So she's got quite a lot to share with us this morning. I'd like to introduce Susan. Susan, come on up and share your heart with our ladies.
Good morning, ladies. As Joanne said, my name is Susan Gottardi, if you don't know me. And Joanne has asked me this morning to share my experience of a proverb and other Bible verses that have impacted my life. And if you look on the tables, there are handouts for you to refer to as I talk. Okay, cast your minds back to Independence Day 2012. Do you recall what you were doing? I was 44 years of age, and I moved from the United Kingdom to the US. I had 2 large suitcases in my hands, and I was carrying my life belongings in them. A few months later, I would get married for the first time, and I would become a wife, a mother, and a grandma literally overnight. So what led to me moving countries? If we press the rewind button back to spring 2011, I was living in the Highlands of Scotland, one of the most remote parts of the United Kingdom. It was a fairly idyllic life. I had a good career that I enjoyed. I worked very hard. I was probably quite a bit of a perfectionist. I had high expectations of myself and other people, and I liked to be in control and to do things a certain way. I had a nice home overlooking the Cairngorm Mountains, and a Hungarian female friend from church who was lodging with me. I did lots of activities after work, like fishing on a friend's boat, and I was a member of a walking club. I liked to do lots of landscape photography, and I exhibited pictures in local art galleries, and I attended various Christian weekend retreats. It was an enjoyable life, and most of the time, the only person that I really needed to think about was myself. I enjoyed friendships with men, but I wasn't really interested in settling down or getting married. Well, I'm not entirely sure what happened, but God started gradually changing my heart over about a 2 to 3 year period. I went from being independent, self-reliant, happily single woman to having a desire to get married and to settle down. The only problem was, did I mention I was living in one of the most remote parts of Scotland? There was very few single Christian men my age living in the area. And I talked to some close female friends about the option of internet dating. It's funny because at the time, there was an eHarmony commercial that kept on appearing on the TV, and I agreed to sign up. When completing my profile page, I thought nothing about checking the box that said anywhere in the world, as I figured that I trusted God, I knew what he was doing. My only requirement was that the man would be a Christian. The way that eHarmony works is they send you contacts of men that fit your profile. Anyway, some 500 plus matches later, with some male friendships ongoing, I was browsing a couple of profiles of men that came in, which I really rarely did, because I figured if a man was interested, he'd contact me, knowing that God is working behind the scenes. And Dave's profile came in, and I thought, wow. I instantly wanted to make contact with him. However, I decided I would pray if it was God's will that Dave would contact me, and guess what? He did. We went through an exchanging of questions, as is recommended in eHarmony, to vet the other person, and it all seemed to go very well. We quickly started exchanging emails, and I recall the first time we connected live overseas on Facebook Messenger. This then led to a nervous phone call between us from Dave and our first Skype encounter. I will never forget this. Dave wanted to make it memorable, so he persuaded his son Chris, who was 14 at the time, and himself to dress up as the Marx Brothers with moustaches and cigars. They remained very still for what seemed like minutes as I stared at the screen, finding it hard to digest what I was seeing and not sure how to react. Eventually, Dave broke the ice by laughing, and we all joined in. It was an interesting few months getting to know each other over Skype. Dave is a morning person, and I'm an evening person. But because of the time difference, it meant that we Skyped early in the morning for me and late at night for him. Chris joined us occasionally, and one time I actually helped Chris prepare for a math test at school over Skype. Dave and I also went through books that related to biblical doctrine, as our Christian worldviews were quite different. I'd received a fairly liberal, postmodern higher education, which included feminism, whereas Dave holds more conservative Christian views. Over time, Dave was open to us pursuing a commitment towards each other, and we agreed we would each commit ourselves to prayer, and if it's God's will, he would open or close the door to marriage. We both felt this was one of our toughest prayers, and God didn't close the door. From that period on, we became committed to our relationship, unless God decided to discontinue things. As well as Skype, I began to attend Dave's church virtually on Sunday evenings. Over time, it felt like I knew the people there, and I became Facebook friends with some of the ladies in the congregation. During the fall of 2011, I visited the US to meet Dave and his friends and family for the first time. I recall walking stridently off the plane and out into the airport and being tired from the flight and dazed from the realization I was visiting Dave in person. I managed to walk right past him as he was waiting eagerly for me with a bunch of flowers in his hands. We got past that, and I sat for a little while with him, waiting for the luggage. It was a surreal moment, but gradually we started chatting and warming up to each other. On the way home from the airport, Dave decided to make a detour to Santa Monica, and after seeing the street entertainment and having a nice meal, we headed to Santa Monica Pier. And to my utter surprise, he proposed to me. And without hesitation, I said yes. So when we met his immediate family and friends the next day, we were engaged. I met Chris, Dave's 14-year-old son, the morning after my arrival. Dave promised Chris that he'd marry someone that Chris felt comfortable with. And Chris had given me the thumbs up of approval early on in the relationship before I visited. Chris was excited at getting a new mum because his birth mum had passed away. I recall Chris asked me in the car while his father was filling up the gas if he could start calling me mum, and I was delighted and said yes. After returning to Scotland, my work colleagues noticed my ring and started asking questions. I spoke to my boss about leaving my job in the near future. While dating on Skype over the next year, we celebrated many occasions, having virtual dinners together. I prepared my Thanksgiving meal for the first time over Skype. We also opened presents virtually for Valentine's Day and for birthdays. And we played quizzes to get to know each other, and we read Christian books, and we always prayed together. Dave briefly visited my family and friends in the UK, and that was during Christmas 2011. It was really special for my father to meet Dave because he passed away shortly afterwards. My father was very happy that he'd met a nice man. It was difficult saying goodbye to my family, especially my father, and later to Dave, as he headed back to the US. Over the next 6 months, we waited patiently for the visa to arrive so that I could move to the US and marry Dave. We continued to pray throughout that time. I managed to sell my house very quickly, which was incredible because the market was so slow. And I sold or gave away most of my possessions except 2 large suitcases full of essentials. I moved to a friend's nearby cottage for the last few weeks in the UK, and I enjoyed different going-away parties with various groups of people that I knew, friends, work colleagues, and people at church. So back to Independence Day 2012. Dave and Chris met me at the airport. I didn't walk past Dave this time. It was a roller coaster ride for the next few months. I enjoyed the US, but it was a big change for me, and it took some adjusting. It started with the ride home from the airport on the 405 freeway, which was frightening. It scared me for life. It was not just the cultural change, though. It was also a change in role and identity, as well as leaving behind all my family and friends. We got married in the fall of 2012, and I met Joanne at my bridal shower, and she told me about Titus 2 Bible study. I recognized it would be very useful to attend, knowing that I'd never been married before, nor had I been a mother. And boy, I was right. Once the honeymoon period went away and reality kicked in, the differences that I once liked about Dave were now becoming more of a challenge. While we shared many interests together, such as photography and travel and music and missions, I found that we had many different views and values on certain topics, such as Christian doctrine, politics, spending habits, parenting. I'd also had no experience of being a stay-at-home mum, especially to a teenage stepson. Chris's mum had passed away, so Dave was trying his hardest to parent Chris single-handedly for a couple of years, and Chris's mum had been sick for several years prior. Chris was used to being independent. He would take himself to school and return before his father got home. And they ate out in restaurants most evenings. Chris was accustomed to a certain lifestyle and freedoms. So when I started to introduce some boundaries, like finishing his homework and tidying his room and him eating healthy meals, he reacted by being disrespectful towards me. Now, Chris is an intelligent lad, But he was failing in many of his subjects at school because he just wouldn't do his homework. And the problem had started before I knew Dave. I intervened by telling Dave how I thought we should deal with the situation. But unfortunately, this created friction between us all. Dave and I also have different temperaments. Dave is a take charge kind of person, the Mr. Commander man that Joanne refers to, where it's very important that he feels respected by his wife. My experience relating to men was very different when I lived in the UK. I was influenced by my higher education, which included feminist theory, and it encouraged me to see men and women as being the same. This worldview caused me much confusion and conflict, and I perceived Dave as being an overly domineering male. My response was initially to assert myself, which created a power struggle in the marriage. Dave is also an introvert, and I'm more extrovert. He's fairly quiet and concise in his words, whereas I can talk till the cows come home. The purpose of communication also varies between us. To me, talking is a hobby, and it's a process of exchanging ideas. To Dave, it's more about clarifying facts. My friends were often people that like to discuss and debate certain topics, whereas Dave is pretty much a literal thinker and a black and white kind of person. And like most men, he likes to get straight to the point. Our differences played out in social situations. Sometimes at church, I'd join a conversation Dave was having with someone, and I would often take over and finish the conversation for him, not realizing it was causing Dave a great deal of frustration. We had huge misunderstandings speaking to each other in the beginning. I discovered we literally had opposite communication styles, which meant there was a high likelihood of misinterpreting each other, and this led to tensions and arguments. I also have a tendency to interrupt, not fully listen, and talk a lot. And our marriage exposed my bad communication habits and my self-centeredness. These issues were also probably confounded by our cultural differences. Dave is American Argentinian, and his first language is Spanish. However, the cultural issues related most to his American identity. There was also a lost in translation when it came to jokes and humor. I didn't realize that I needed to adjust the way that I was communicating so that Dave felt respected by me. Another issue was I was used to having my own way, and I'd become self-centered. I now had a husband and a teenage son. I was also used to being in control after working in management for over a decade in an often harsh and competitive male-dominated environments. I'd come to understand biblically the importance of submission and following my husband's lead, but it was only head knowledge. The reality was it was conditional, and I didn't really want to go along with Dave if I didn't agree with his perspective, which was often. I excused myself, saying that I knew best, and trying to persuade him of this. I had a domineering and demanding manner. I would take over when a problem needed to be solved, giving him advice and trying to correct him, criticizing him if he wasn't accepting my position, and reacting in an argumentative manner if I didn't like how he came across towards me. Dave responded by becoming increasingly angry, and he started to withdraw. I didn't realize that my behavior was causing these reactions in him. It was easy for me to put the focus of blame on him. I was unintentionally disrespecting him. I thought that my actions were showing love and concern by correcting him. I didn't realize that showing love meant showing unconditional respect to him, despite his weaknesses, accepting him the way he is and allowing him to lead our home. I started to become bitter towards Dave because I was focusing on how he was treating me, his angry manner, his snappy and harsh words. I developed a grudge against him, and I would react in a hostile manner, and this created a vicious circle. The tide started changing gradually over time as I prayed to the Lord and I attended Titus 2. I realized that I couldn't change my husband nor my son. The only person I can change is myself. God humbled me through the hardships, and I chose to lean on God, and instead of trying to work out things myself and analyze things from my own limited worldview. A verse that comes to mind is Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. I began to recognize some blind spots, and it was only when I was humble and open to listening to God that he revealed truths in me. I started to change the way that I was responding to Dave and my attitude so that it was more biblical. I was not fully seeing what was going on. I was only seeing Dave's anger and hostility towards me and Chris disrespecting me. I learnt that my worldview I held was, if Dave isn't nice to me, then why should I react in a loving way back to him? And that is not a godly view. I learnt that Dave is a gift from God to me, and I needed to love and accept him unconditionally. The love chapter in 1 Corinthians says that we should not be provoked, nor take into account a wrong suffered. Love bears all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. I needed to focus on God's grace towards me. I'm a sinner, and yet I've received God's grace as a free gift. There's nothing I've done, nor could ever do to deserve this. The prophet Isaiah says, "My righteous deeds are but dirty rags." I learnt what it meant in 1 Peter when referring to husbands. They may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. I didn't fully know what was happening, but I totally trusted God and leaned on him and his strength through the hardships and pain. John 15:5 states, "Apart from me, you can do nothing." It took a while to recognize what was happening. My behavior was adversely affecting our marriage. I wasn't submitting and respecting my husband as God commands us in Ephesians 5. I needed to put away bitterness and anger and to forgive him, to apologize to Dave and repent so my sins may be wiped clean. I repented and I apologized to Dave, and we eventually made a commitment to working things out in our marriage, whatever it takes. It's taken time for the trust to develop and our relationship to build again. Dave started opening up more and sharing, and the level of intimacy improves each day. The atmosphere in the home is now relaxed and enjoyable, like it was during our dating, but it's much better as the love and commitment in our marriage has deepened. There's going to be ups and downs, as in all marriages. I'm a work in progress until I leave this world. I've learnt by accepting Dave as he is, instead of trying to change him, that our differences are a good thing and they complete us. that I can learn and grow as a person by embracing our differences and listening to his wise counsel. Dave is a gift from God to me. I can now express my views, not in a forceful way, but respectfully, knowing that I trust Dave to take the lead in our marriage. Dave is a spontaneous, in-the-moment kind of person. He often leaves things to the last minute, whereas I think things through, plan ahead, and get things done. I've learnt to be more flexible in my approach to things, and I now enjoy his spontaneity, such as going on a last-minute date. I've also become accustomed to his more generous nature and spending habits, going to fancy restaurants and surprise weekends away. It's his way of showing he cares. And through us sharing and attending Titus 2, I've also developed a more solid biblical worldview. My relationship with Chris has improved since the dynamics have changed between Dave and I. I visibly support Dave as overall head of the home, and Dave supports me in the daily parenting of Chris. Chris is now 17, and I've developed a good, solid relationship with him. We have an open dialogue with lots of good-humoured banter. He's graduating this year, and he has grades A's and B's at school. He's quickly becoming independent, he's driving his own car, and he runs his own computer building business, Terabyte Computer Systems. And we enjoy our weekly coffee times together in Starbucks. To conclude, we make a choice each day in our marriage to move towards either oneness or isolation. Proverbs 14:1 states, "The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish tears it down with her own hands." That's the New American Standard Bible. The message says, "Lady Wisdom builds a lovely home, so fool comes along and tears it down brick by brick." This proverb is practical, contrasting the wise woman with the fool. We have a choice to build up our household, or we're responsible for tearing it down through our words, attitudes, and behavior. What choice will you make today? To build up your home or to tear it down? This week's beauty tip is choose to build up your household. The beauty enhancer is Proverbs 14:1, "The wise woman builds her house." And the beauty regimen is write down one thing you can do to build up your household and do it. Thank you.